What if one of the world's most recognizable voices had a side to his life that nearly no one knew about for 25 years? Andrea Bocelli, known for packing stadiums and performing for millions, carried a story behind the spotlight that few have ever heard. It's a narrative of discipline, danger, and choices that formed who he became both on and off stage. Come along as we explore the lesser-known aspects of Andrea Bocelli's life and work. Secret Nights Exposed. Long before Andrea Bocelli became a known figure, his life followed a tough and usually unnoticed routine. From Tuesdays to Sundays, he worked wherever music was needed. In piano bars, private parties, small events, and busy spaces where conversation often drowned out the sound. These were hardly glamorous stages. People spoke, laughed, and sometimes scarcely acknowledged the music at all. Bocelli was not introduced as a special guest or a rising talent. He was simply part of the background, intended to fill the space and keep the mood pleasant. The emotional cost of this type of employment was significant. Unacknowledged singing can subtly exhaust a person. There were no reviews, no standing ovations, and no indication that the performance was significant after the fact. Bocelli had to provide his finest voice to individuals who were not listening closely, if at all. That lack, of feedback drove him to search internally rather than outward for motivation. He could not rely on applause to judge his worth or growth. Instead, he learned to measure himself by his own standards, which made him more self-aware and more demanding of his own quality. Anonymity, however, also provided an unanticipated benefit. Without an audience seeing him as Andrea Bocelli, he was free to experiment. He gained the ability to swiftly assess a room, modify volume and tone, and maintain emotional awareness even in informal situations. These insights would subsequently become vital on larger stages. Without the support of reputation or image, he was learning how to connect just through sound. At the same time, Bocelli was living two musical lives. In his heart, he was sincerely committed to classical music. He believed in its discipline, structure, and tradition. But reality demanded adaptability. Classical performances were infrequent and difficult to access, while popular music covered the expenses. An internal dispute resulted from this. He was concerned that his artistic identity would be weakened by playing lighter music. He dreaded moving too far from the direction he valued. However, idealism had little place in survival. While clinging to opulent dreams during the day, Bocelli continued to play popular songs at night. Often he played to indifferent people while visualizing concert halls and orchestras. The contrast was stark. He had to keep his skills sharp in settings that did not require it and protect his long-term ambitions in environments that did not reflect them. This conflict caused him to evolve swiftly both as a musician and as a person. The emotional aspect of these years was just as strong. Traveling, late hours, and transient locations led to brief yet passionate connections. Bocelli regularly met someone, bonded profoundly, and then moved on just as soon. These were not casual times for him. He fell in love easily and fully even when he realized the bond might not continue. Each relationship entailed emotional danger, but he accepted it. These experiences influenced his speech in subtle ways. They taught him how to communicate longing, tenderness, and affection honestly. Singing became not simply technical effort, but emotional communication. The experiences he lived through offstage began to manifest in how he sung on stage. And just when this peaceful, divided life seemed forever, something began to alter in ways he could not yet predict. Forbidden melodies. Andrea Bocelli has very rigid views regarding what music should be respected for a long time. To him, serious music meant classical lineage, formal training, and pieces that demanded technical control and discipline. Opera stood at the center of this idea. Popular music, by comparison, seemed simpler and less challenging. He did not disregard it with arrogance, but with distance. He was concerned that entering it might cause him to stray from the standards he had set for himself in as it was not the world he felt he belonged to. That conviction began to weaken via experience rather than theory. Bocelli came across pop tunes that were meticulously composed and emotionally accurate as he proceeded to play in various venues. He observed powerful melodies, reflective lyrics, music, and situations that called for moderation rather than force. These interactions encouraged him to listen more intently. He came to see that emotional integrity can be just as difficult as technical proficiency and that complexity is not always the source of difficulty. When pop music was at its greatest, it demanded emotional sincerity, timing, and clarity. As this understanding deepened, so did a silent fear. But worried that embracing mainstream music may compromise his artistic, music, character. He was afraid that people with strong roots in classical heritage would view him as less serious or credible. Critics and purists were quick to voice concerns. Some wondered if it meant reducing standards to bridge genres. Others claimed that accessibility came at the cost of depth. He felt the weight of those opinions even when they weren't addressed directly to him. Private doubt coexisted with public criticism. Bocelli, music, asked himself challenging questions. Was he moving towards something new or away from something essential? Would combining styles confuse audiences or damage music, his voice? These questions did not have easy answers and he did not rush past them. Instead of responding with defensiveness, he chose curiosity. He listened more, studied more, and tried his voice in fresh ways. Music, rather than protecting a fixed image, he allowed himself to grow. This openness led to a notable difference, music, in how he sung. Pop music strengthened his phrasing. It taught him to communicate more with fewer notes and to let stillness convey significance. Storytelling became more direct. Each sentence ought to feel personal, not vast. Vulnerability became more prominent. Instead of hiding behind power and skill, he learned to step back and let emotion speak clearly. At the same time, Bocelli did not relinquish rigor. He instilled classical discipline throughout every performance, regardless of genre. Breath control, tone, and precision remained vital. What changed was the goal. Rather than impressing, he concentrated on connecting. He balanced accessibility with care, making sure that clarity never meant carelessness. Through this approach, Bocelli began redefining excellence, music, for himself. Excellence was no longer connected to category or label. It became about honesty, preparation, and respect for the music in front of him. He did not lose depth by letting pop music into his universe. He extended it. And just as his voice began reaching bigger audiences, another turning point appeared through the people he would soon sing beside prohibited melodies. As Andrea Bocelli's career broadened up, collaboration became one of the most meaningful components of his musical life. He never treated duets as music contests or opportunity to stand out. Singing alongside another artist was a dialogue to him. Each voice has its own purpose, and the idea was not to dominate, but to mix. He thought that two voices should assist each other, not fight for attention. This approach affected how he chose collaborators, music, and how he prepared for every collaborative performance. Listening played a crucial role in this process. Bocelli considered listening to be an active, rather than a passive, skill. He carefully observed how the other vocalist used breath, structured words, and conveyed emotion before recording or performing. In order to achieve balance, he modified his own response and delivery, at times lowering his tone and at other times withholding power. This versatility allowed the music to feel natural rather than forced. It also demonstrated tremendous respect for the other artists. Voice in choices. What made Bocelli's collaboration stand out was the mutual respect across genres. He did not view boundaries between classical, jazz, or pop as impediments. Instead, he saw them as various languages that could speak to one another. The genre, music, became secondary when both performers arrived ready and willing. What mattered was common intention and emotional honesty. Music, Bocelli learned the importance of phrasing by working with Tony Bennett. Bennett had an amazing sense of timing. He knew when to extend a phrase and when to move swiftly, enabling the meaning of the words to lead the music. From him, Bocelli learned that simplicity can be powerful when every choice is considered. Bennett's calm confidence also highlighted that longevity comes from consistency rather than force. Barbara Streisand delivered a different lesson. Her emotional acuity stood out. Every line she sang felt deliberately placed as if nothing was accidental. Bocelli saw how she never allowed her feelings to run amok, striking a balance between openness and control. Singing with her highlighted the necessity of restraint, especially when the message of the song is already strong. Celine Dion displayed technical stamina at the greatest level. Her ability to sustain long performances while keeping clarity and strength created a lasting impression. Bocelli saw how independence on stage was bolstered by discipline in the background. Dion's hard ethic served as a reminder that both technical and physical preparation are necessary for emotional delivery. Luciano Pavarotti maintained a particular position among these collaborations. For Bocelli, Pavarotti was not an unreachable legend, but a co-worker. Singing beside him erased the space between admiration and reality. Pavarotti demonstrated that excellence does not require intimidation with his compassion and self-assurance. Their work together affirmed that shared craft counts more than hierarchy. Beyond the voices he sang with, there were voices he never met but really admired. Drama and intensity were embodied by Maria Callas. Bocelli liked her desire to express fragility and risk in every performance. He was deeply affected by her bravery and the emotional impact of her singing, which transcended technical mastery. An alternative, musical, influence was provided by Renata Tebaldi. Her voice was recognized for warmth, purity, and restraint. Bocelli liked her capacity to affect listeners without excess, illustrating that control and tranquility can be just as expressive, music, as intensity. Even in the absence of actual interaction, these imagined partnerships shaped his ideals and lingered in his mind as a creative desire. And as these musical exchanges grew richer, the places where they happened began to matter just as much. Duets they hid. As Andrea Bocelli's career progressed, the venues where he performed began to shape him as much as the music itself. Certain stages were very important historically. Singing at the Colosseum, within the Vatican, or near the pyramids was not simply a professional milestone, but a psychological test. These settings were packed with memory, tradition, and meaning that extended far beyond any single performance. It took more than just a fine voice to stand in such places. It called for emotional restraint, awareness, and respect. There was a particular type of pressure while performing in historical contexts. The audience was not just listening. The past, music, felt current. Long before Bocelli, these places had been filled with innumerable voices, ceremonies, and happenings. This knowledge might easily become overwhelming. Instead of trying to dominate the atmosphere, he chose a calmer approach. He tried to perform with history rather than against it. His goal was to fit into something bigger rather than to make the moment bigger. This mindset grounded him and kept his performances authentic rather than flashy. Bocelli was taught humility by these tremendous moments. Fame might offer access, but it did not grant ownership. The situation required caution. He discovered that where there was already a lot of significance, simplicity frequently carried more weight. Each note had to seem vital. This discipline honed his sense of responsibility as a performer and reinforced his idea that music should serve the moment, not the ego. Yet just as crucial were the smaller places and the rough evenings. Not every concert was excellent. There were evenings when he performed with a cold, when weariness, music, made attention harder, or when lousy acoustics absorbed the sound. These performances lacked glitz and frequently needed further, musical, work to stay under control. Comfort and habit had no place there. Every obstacle required patience and fast correction. But learn to cherish these moments. Struggle, he understood, mattered more than spectacle. He discovered the most about himself when all went wrong. These nights, music, forced him to listen intently to his own voice, preserve energy, and stay present. They also taught him how to operate without relying on optimal conditions. In those environments, music, skill became survival rather than presentation. Resilience grew from repetition. Each imperfect performance enhanced his ability to regroup and continue. He discovered that a challenging evening might still have significance and that disappointment did not equate to failure. These experiences, music, generated quiet confidence. He was confident that even in less than perfect circumstances, he could adjust, persevere, and produce. In retrospect, Bocelli frequently remembers the surprising performances. Not necessarily the greatest crowds or the most famous locations, but instances when connection seemed real despite hurdles. A modest setting where the audience listened carefully. A night when his voice was not at its finest, but his attention was intense. These memories have weight because they show growth earned rather than granted. Adversity sharpened his presence. It cut away distractions and forced him to focus entirely with the music and the audience. Scale and setting did not conceal anything. Every note had to be important. These encounters helped him grow both personally and as a performer over time. In unglamorous conditions, Bocelli realized what genuinely supported him. He learned that consistency, attention, and respect for the audience mattered more than prestige. Growth did not always arrive on large stages. It frequently emerged silently in rooms that few people would recall. And just as the places began to feel familiar, Bocelli's outlook on life itself began to evolve in a more personal direction. Power phases. For Andrea Bocelli, saying yes has never been a thoughtless music habit. It is a choice and frequently a daring one. Throughout his life, yes has meant opening the door to love, risk, and new experiences, even when the conclusion was uncertain. Saying yes needed courage because it meant giving up control. It meant admitting that not everything would go smoothly and that certain choices would lead to suffering or disappointment. Still, Bocelli believed that sealing himself off would be far more detrimental in the long term. This candor turned to become a defense against cynicism. In a world where saying no can feel safer and more regulated, Bocelli chose the opposite path. He believed that continual denial hardens a person over time. By saying yes, he kept emotionally flexible and curious. The word "see" was not merely a response but an emotional posture. It represented his determination to interact fully with life rather than observe from a distance. Saying yes kept music him present, involved, and open to surprise. Creatively, this approach molded numerous turning points in his career. Accepting unknown opportunities led to collaborations he never anticipated or expected. Some of these collaborations transcended languages, customs, or genres. Others tested his comfort zone as a singer. Instead of questioning whether music, something fit his image, Bocelli inquired whether it seemed honest and meaningful. This small change made it possible to grow fearlessly. This openness inevitably included mistakes. Not every yes led to success. Some decisions resulted in criticism or embarrassing outcomes. Bocelli came to view these musical instances as experiences that broadened his perspective rather than as failures. He did not rush to remove them or defend himself. He permitted them to exist, knowing that growth rarely comes from caution alone. Choosing expansion, music, over protection became a defining principle. This approach also affected how he treated individuals. Music became the focus of emotional generosity. Bocelli was passionate about using music and interpersonal relationships to make people feel happy. He thought that connection mattered more than perfection. When he sang, his purpose was not to impress, but music, to deliver something true. Music for him was an act of sharing rather than performance. Each concert was a chance to contribute rather than display. Such transparency had a price. Feeling deeply was necessary to be emotionally available. It meant that the energy of audiences, partners, and interpersonal relationships was absorbed by music. There were times when I felt vulnerable and worn out. Opening oneself repeatedly demands strength, especially in a public life where exposure is constant. But Bocelli accepted this sacrifice as part of the deal. The reward was connection, trust, and shared experience. This transparency had long-lasting benefits for people. Saying yes helped him to develop important friendships and experience moments that careful planning could never generate. It kept his art alive and responsive. Music, instead of repeating himself, he continued to improve. His voice grew not simply technically but emotionally, fashioned by a readiness to feel and respond. Saying yes to music eventually turned into a survival code. It shielded him from loneliness and artistic stagnation. It served as a reminder that both life and music advance only when an individual is prepared to intervene rather than retreat. And as this ideology carried him farther, it quickly began to impact how he felt about family and the next generation. Fatherly secrets. Becoming a father introduced a new element to Andrea Bocelli's life, one that impacted how he regarded achievement, risk, and responsibility. These emotions became apparent when he sang with his son, Matteo. Sharing the stage was profoundly emotional. It was about connection and trust as much as music. Standing with his son, Bocelli felt pride in Matteo's talent and effort. He simultaneously sensed the burden of what that route might require. That pride was strongly related to dread. Bocelli knew how stressful the music business could be. Expectations could increase more quickly than confidence, and applause could swiftly fade. Watching Matteo step into this environment stirred apprehension. He wanted to appreciate music, his son's enthusiasm and singing, while simultaneously wishing he could shelter him from disappointment. This mix of pride and fear made each shared performance significant but also challenging. Letting go of control was one of the hardest lessons. As a father, Bocelli knew that guiding has, music, boundaries. He could not influence Matteo's trip without taking something away from it. He was aware that advice could only go so far despite his experience. Real growth had to emerge from personal choices and actual experience. Trusting his son required stepping back even when instinct prompted him to intervene. But Bocelli's expertise of the sector made this procedure much more challenging. He recognized how pressure grows, especially for young artists. Comparisons begin early, often unfairly. Being known as someone's child adds another layer of expectation. Even when rejection is common, it can still feel personal. However, having experienced all of this firsthand, that knowledge remained intimate. Because of this, encouragement had to cohabit music with realism. Matteo's passion for music was encouraged by him, but he did not make it seem simple or certain. Open dialogue was important. Bocelli wanted his son to know that perseverance, hard work, and patience are necessary for success in music. At the same time, he did not want realism to turn into fear. Balancing honesty with hope becomes a serious endeavor. There was also the urge to protect without intruding. Bocelli realized that too much protection could restrict growth. Stepping in too often could weaken confidence. He chose instead to stay there and available, ready to support, but not direct. This technique needed restraint and trust, skills he had developed during years of performance and reflection. Letting children develop their own voice became important to his ideas. Bocelli believed that guidance should offer tools, not commands. Each person needs room to find who they are, music, and how they want to express themselves. For Matteo, this meant allowing originality to come before legacy. Bocelli did not want his name to become a burden or a blueprint. Love in this setting became about presence more than direction. Being there, listening, music, and showing support mattered more than shaping outcomes. But acknowledged that his responsibility was not to plan his son's future, but to walk beside him as it developed. And as time continued to go on, this reflection on family inevitably led him to think more thoroughly about age, change, and the passage of years. 60 and careless. Turning 60 was not something Andrea Bocelli tried to celebrate or avoid. He tackled it with the same calm attention to detail and honesty that he applied to other things in life. He didn't want to worry about getting older since he thought it would interfere with his quality of life. The phases of maturity no longer follow the same timeframe, and life expectancy has altered. He was more concerned with how he worked, how he felt, and how he continued to interact with the environment. Bocelli often referred to the distinction between biological age and chronological age. The number on a calendar did not necessarily reflect a person's enthusiasm, focus, or competence. By being active, maintaining discipline, and caring for his voice and body, he felt linked to the present rather than defined by time past. This attitude helped him to remain interested and curious rather than cautious or, music, withdrawn. He did not, however, act as though milestones had no significance. Turning 60 brought emotional weight. Numbers have a way of asking questions even when a person tries not to listen. Bocelli felt the shift silently. There was introspection but neither a crisis nor a dramatic re-evaluation. He grew more conscious of time and more frugal with his efforts. There was no sense of loss in this awareness. It felt like clarity. Instead of fighting against age, Bocelli accepted it without giving in to it. He accepted that certain things require more care, more relaxation, and more attention than before. At the same time, he refused to consider age as a signal to slow down creatively. He did not judge relevance by youth, but by intention and effort. His interest remained unchanged. He continued exploring new music, new partnerships, and new ways of expressing existing thoughts. The voice too continues to shift. Instead of disappearing, it evolved. Get more depth and control over the music. Emotional awareness grew more developed. Bocelli respected the changes in his voice and worked with it instead of trying to capture the sound of the past. Living forward became a purposeful choice. He didn't compare himself to past iterations of himself or focus on past accomplishment, music. Every stage of life brought with it new obligations and priorities. Moving with time, rather than holding on, was the aim. Bocelli kept looking forward, keeping an open mind about what might come in the following chapter. Andrea Bocelli's journey demonstrates that growth is not solely dependent on recognition or talent but also on consistent choices, transparency, and musical courage. From quiet nights at modest venues to music, legendary stages, he stayed present, disciplined, and eager to take risks. His story is about moving forward, embracing change, and letting life mold each chapter. Breaking music, every rule. Andrea Bocelli has never enjoyed being labeled as a man who overcomes blindness. For him, that rhetoric suggests a battle he never agreed to wage. He does not consider his life to be split between failure and achievement or struggle and victory. Instead, blindness is merely one truth among many, not a headline, not a defining story. By refusing to define his experience as adversity, Bocelli discreetly rejected a narrative that often reduces people to what they lack rather than what they choose to do. His treatment of his own body and health is a direct reflection of this mindset. Bocelli has often maintained he avoids doctors and does not base his personality around medical care or physical restriction. This is not denial or recklessness, but a purposeful decision to live without frequent reminders of frailty. He does not want to be managed or monitored into prudence. He wants to be active, engaged, and accountable for himself. He also dislikes the public infatuation with inspiring stories that convert personal events into symbols. For Bocelli, there is nothing to overcome, only work to be done. His discipline was quietly but powerfully affected by that way of thinking. He never gave himself extra indulgence because he never gave himself the justification of limitation. His routines were built on consistent practice, focus, and, music, self-expectation. He turned there prepared, not because he had something to prove, but because that was his norm. There was no place for self-pity or a desire for recognition because there was no battle narrative. He expected effort from himself, and that expectation became commonplace rather than heroic. Physical activity played a crucial part in sustaining this philosophy. As a young man, Bocelli pushed himself into skiing, windsurfing, and even skydiving. These were neither acts of revolt or thrills seeking attention. They were manifestations of self-reliance and faith in his own body. He gained mental and physical balance and self-assurance via movement. It enabled him to completely engage with the world and music, without fear dictating his decisions. These activities also required focus, serenity, and control. The same qualities needed for singing at a high level. Later in life, that fearlessness, music, had to adjust. With age, responsibility expanded, especially as a spouse and father. His wife's call on caution shows a natural adjustment, not a loss of courage. Bocelli did not abandon risk. He discovered how to measure it. This mix between boldness and care echoes his broader approach to life. Remain grounded yet remain open. A system based on faith, discipline, music, and humility lies at the heart of it all. Bocelli doesn't believe in shortcuts or miracles. It is a belief in time, patience, and long labor. Even if it takes years to see results, he, music, believes that hard work pays off. His discipline is constant rather than severe. Consistency, daily attendance, and drama-free work are important to him. Humility ties it all together. Despite popularity and accolades, he resists considering himself as extraordinary. Talent, in his view, deserves responsibility, not ego. If you like this glimpse into Belly's life, please leave a comment below with your favorite portion of his journey, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and enable notifications.